why many of the Primarchs were hated. Welcome, gentle listener, I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the factions, forces, and faces of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace. There is only time for war. Now do please like the video and check that you are still subscribed, and consider turning on the notifications bell. I do not abuse this feature, so it should not be too onerous. But now, let us proceed. For today, we shall be discussing why some of the Primarchs, most importantly, the ones who fell to chaos, were possibly hated by their own men. And this can seem like a simple thing. Surely it is just the usual. The enlisted men not understanding the distant figures who tell them where and when to die. Those like Haig, who evoke such sentiments as, ours was not to reason why, ours was just to do and die. But this sentiment was simply not the usual case when it came to the Astartes of the Great Crusade and the subsequent rebellion known as the Horus Heresy. For these beings, the Primarchs, were not seen as distant, cold, and alien. They were viewed like the very things that they were, the fathers of their people. Each was a genetic template from which the gene seed of the Legion was created. In reality, all of the warriors of a Legion were very really genetically similar to their lord. But more than this, the Primarchs were seen as the pinnacle of achievement of said genes and benefits that were distinct to the warriors. They were like demigods of battle, but also of statecraft, strategy, and knowledge. The Primarchs were supposed to be everything to which an Astartes could ever aspire. Impossible to match them, yet a beacon of hope and potential. And in many legions, this was indeed the case, where the finding of the Primarch was the culmination of their strengths and the removal of the weaknesses. The achievements that were made when Sanguinius, Guilliman, Dorn, Vulcan, Corax, or Fulgrim were reunited with their legions was beyond compare. They practically and effectively transformed their legions. They brought out the best in them, made them so much more than the sum of their constituent parts. Yet, as time went by, some of these paragons did not match this heady height, this perfect synthesis, and secretly, many were despised by the men they led. But how could this be? How could the godlike Primarchs err so dramatically that they were actually loathed by the warriors who were not just mentally conditioned to, but also genetically predisposed to love and practically worship their leaders? Simple. Because no matter how one might shout and scream for it, feel that merely existing demands it, respect is earned. And these beings simply did not earn it. They treated their very sons like dogs or worse. They treated them like expendable slime or numbers on a chart, to be used and abused as they saw fit. Oh, the eternal excuse of the ends justifies the means, or the Astartes' only task is to fight and die for the whole human race, were oft bandied about. But this was semantics, for cruelty is always a choice. One that does not go unmarked, unnoticed. And today, we shall take a whirlwind tour of why some of the Primarchs were well and truly despised by the men that they treated like disposable scum. But first, as usual, I like to bring the reality of the issue into stark relief by showing, not just telling, the true callousness of the situation. So let us have a wee story to help us elucidate the matter. The story will be self-contained, but continues from the Ullik the Unreasonable playlist if you wish to know more. From the Bald Library. For his greater glory, my name, I am not Hexamon. The crusade is about to be launched. I get to see them again. Tarax and most importantly, Ullik. I get to fight alongside them once more, a joy to a weary and voluminous heart. Yet, I remember when we met, what we said and why, because they were the only ones who knew the truth. They were not even from my own legion, not blood of my blood, seed of the same father. Yet in them I found true brotherhood for the first time. And that seemed so strange to anyone who knew of my history, for I am one of the most rare of all things. I was a twin, and both of us made it through the trials. We were both Astartes, Hexamon, and myself, Hexamel. And when I told Ullik and Tarax my goal, they understood. But when did it happen? When did it manifest within me? Well, it was the Lair campaign, of course. That is when it started. A campaign that should have taken 3 legions, entire orders of knights and legios of titans, whole populations of solar auxilia and militia. Yet, we did it with just us. He did it. But it was not in the accomplishment, but how it was done. None saw what he did to us. None bothered to count the dead, nor how they died. He had won. Fulgrim had done the impossible. That is how they all felt, how they beamed at him, kissed his boots, practically worshipped him. It felt that I alone could see him for what he was. I felt that I was going mad. None saw but me. But then, none who could share in my feeling were left alive. The moment. That single moment. I remember it like it is happening all around me, indelibly burned onto my eyes, my ears, my mind. I cannot and will not forget. Hexamel and Hexamon, the lords of the oathkeepers. We were twins who always attempted to outshine each other. We worked hand in glove, always side by side wherever possible. We landed with our chapter on one of the floating atolls of the lair, the Xenos scum. Snakes were they, large and fast, firing weapons of unnatural origin, tearing through even our warplate. The fighting was hard, the days filled with slaughter. For they would not concede defeat, would not bend to the oblivion that we all knew, even they, that could not be avoided. And so, we, the Oathkeepers, were dropped down via Storm Eagles and Thunderhawks, hitting them hard and fast. We fanned out and swept through them like a firestorm. Ours was one of the best chapters in the Legion, all knew. We, the Oathkeepers, who had covered ourselves in glory time and time again. For we were one of the oldest formations, even when there were minuscule numbers of Emperor's children. Hexamon and myself, Hexamel, the twin blades they called us, and we never failed. Ever. Our target was one of the most tightly populated Xenos cities. Our assault was perfectly timed, our disposal as precise as always. We fought for days without break, without even moments of respite. The slithering lair came on at us without end, and soon we began to be pushed back by their sheer numbers. Our ammunition spent, we were unable to hold them, even we. And then, in the morning light, we saw the contrails of assault craft. Most of us still alive, despite the hardships. We cheered as we saw the purple of their flanks, the vast array of landing craft whipping through the air towards our position. Finally, The promised and planned for reinforcements had arrived. We stood on landmarks and swiftly constructed barricades and cheered until we were hoarse. Our throats hurt. Then the sound ceased, for the landers flew over the top of our heads. Then further. I looked. I somehow knew. My twin did not. He looked at my face. How it dropped. And he was confused. Until he, too, finally understood. As the landers continued and we saw them fly into the distance, the reality struck home. The reinforcements had been reassigned. Whomever was in command had declared our segment neutralized, had deemed the enemy were defeated, and they repositioned those forces to another atoll, another battle. As the contrails disappeared into the distance, I knew. This was because of him. This was because of our own Primarch. He had sworn that he would take this world in record time. He had sworn he could not be defeated. He had sworn that this would be a campaign so swift and deadly that all of his brothers, the godlike Primarchs, all would know his caliber, all would shudder at his mighty deeds. And they left us here to die. And of course, we did. The next 2 days were hard. The lair knew that they were dead. Even if they killed us all here, they knew. And so they charged us again and again. When we even ran out of small arms munitions, when we used up even our bolt pistol rounds, when every charge on every pack was spent, when every missile was fired, they came on at us all the more. And our circle of resistance slowly constricted, as we fought them with Charnabal blade and chainsword, as we slew them in their heaps, without respite, without support, without even ammunition. They tore us down one by one. And in the end, there was just me and Hexamon left. But the Xenos were not inexhaustible themselves. With blades alone we had slain more than half of the monsters, and that was nearly enough when added to the massacre we had performed when suitably equipped. The sun set on one last night, and they stormed our position. And when morning came, there were only 2 beings left breathing, living, on the entire platform. Sat in the grime, covered in blood and viscera, the morning light struck the 2 of us. We were all that was left, surrounded by hundreds of the snake-like beings. All was quiet. All was as still as the grave. And he started laughing, and I joined him. His was not the laughter of those who had seen death coming for them and spat in its eye. It was the first sign of a shattered mind. He could not accept that we had been reduced to this. He could not understand how we had been left by our own father to die on the spot. The best-line chapter he commanded, sacrificed, for a number on a chronometer, left to die to satisfy a boast. By the end of that day, we were finally evacuated, and all oohed and ahed at the achievement of the Primarch. How he had smashed the enemy and claimed this world that could not be claimed. How he was a god of war. And we both laughed in their faces. Yet his was always the longer and the faster to come. The unhinged wheezing of a mind smashed to pieces. He held it in check when he needed to. Hid it from all, but he could not hide it from me. I was his twin. Then I began to hate him. Fulgrim. But I did not know it would get so much worse, would become my very reason to exist. My reason to survive the battles, to endure the hardships, to reach to the highest rank and skill level possible. Where others played at perfection, believing themselves driven, we too personified it. We were the oathkeepers. We were all that was left of them. And how quickly our honor had been forgotten. The names of our troops in the rolls, of course, but not lauded as they should have been. Forgotten, because they were not important. They had just been the coins spent to purchase pride for our lord and master, full Grim. But later, it became so much more to me. It became my life's ambition, my entire goal, my reason. A new chapter given. We trained it to within inches of their lives. We spent our new warriors as our father had spent our true brothers of the original oathkeepers. Yet I did not always hold my tongue. I made snide remarks, took the shine off any of our lord's achievements. It rolled out of my mouth before I could control it sometimes, and finally it was noted. Of course, the method in which I knew this was interesting enough. Another Xenos sweep, of course, on another Xenos world. Another planet where we hunted through the deep and dark underground caverns, slicing and cutting, shooting and burning anything that lived. Hexamon had always been at my side. We were inseparable, but not for the reason most would believe. And in one segment of tunnel, where we stood and all others had been sent to clear and continue the Xenocide, he turned to me in the dark. I could tell it was the moment. His bolters both in their holsters, but his stance was off. He was preparing for a strike, and he knew that I knew that. We both circled, hands on Charnabar blades, as he spat. You could not hide it. The Primarch himself has given the word. You did not hold your tongue, Hexamel, so it was either you or both of us. So, it's you. Then he lunged at me. In one fluid movement, his sword was drawn and swept towards my neck. We had both known this time would come, and I had watched him so long. He'd always won that tiny bit more often in the pens, because I had let him. I had always let him think himself that tiny bit faster, that tiny bit more skilled, and I let his sword sail past my face as I stepped backward, twisting and bringing my own blade around, and when my twist was concluded, his head struck and rolled across the ground. I did not hesitate. I stripped his body and then donned his armor, placing his dead body in my own war plate. I took his blood and daubed it across the armor I wore, then cleaned the war plate he wore, and I reported the one sentence to Eidolon, the officer in charge. It is done. Hexamel is dead. He laughed. He actually laughed. And from that day forward, I was called Hexamon. And when the campaign was complete, I was given an audience. The perfumed and painted image of the Primarch looked ridiculous to me, but my face was blank but for a fixed grin, the one I had seen Hexamon use whenever he thought I was not looking. And the Primarch asked me how I did it. What was the look on Hexamel's face when he knew the end was coming, and at the hand of his own twin? He did not understand. He never did. So fixated with himself even before the painted face, even before the layer blade and all of the changes in the Legion, he was always too consumed with himself, his image, his honor, his glory. And I lied. I told him how there had been tears of regret and confusion, how they had been whimpering and begging. He ate it up like the finest banquet, drank it down like the finest wine. I had lied to a god and gotten away with it, because no matter his abilities, his prowess, his power, Fulgrim was nothing but an empty bag of wind. He heard what he wanted to hear, saw what he wanted to see, and through it all, he never made eye contact with me once, always looking over my head at his own reflection. It was all for his greater glory. And on that day, I did not pity what he had become, for I knew the canker already existed way before the fall. I knew he was empty. I knew he was wounded. I knew he was actually nothing at all. A puppet with power, nothing more. And on that day, I swore, in the future, I would have my revenge. Continued after the lore. I hope this wee tale showed how one can indeed hate one's masters. But now let us take that whirlwind tour of some of the horrors that led men to die. Let us discuss the catalogue of hatred, and who it was behind it all. For the legions would never have turned, if not for their Primarchs being led so easily onto the path to hell. Simply put, a loyal attack dog will do as it is instructed, and it is instructed by its master. And it takes two spite and abuse towards that canine before they eventually turn on them, if they ever do. To many, this will seem obvious, but let us not forget that this has always been a channel for beginners to the lore, those who hobby and play, but perhaps do not have the time to devote to learning all of the lore firsthand. Hence, let us list the trespasses of the Primarchs and their very worst. Angron. Why not begin with the most obvious, eh? From the moment the Warhound's Legion met their Primarch, it was a calamity. For the Primarch was deemed the runt of the litter. Oh, many will point directly at Lorgar and state that he was the weakest and most pitiful. Yet Angron was the only Primarch not to take the world on which he had landed. This was, of course, because the barbarians of that world had stuck the butcher's nails into his very brain. An incredibly complex archaeotech from the dark age of technology. It could not be removed even by the Emperor himself, and it dug into his brain, tearing it apart as the years went by, slowly by slowly, millimeter by millimeter, dicing his grey matter. But when Angron was reunited with his men, his very sons, he would not accept them, and slaughtered every officer who was sent in to try to get through to him, until Khan finally managed to engage the brute, and things did not improve. Angron never accepted his legion, treated them like ants, and decimated them regularly. Should they take a world at lightning-fast pace, even if they were 1 second beyond the time allocated and allotted by the Primarch, he would punish them with real spite. He would have them execute each other on the regular. Decimation. And the other forces attached to his expeditionary fleets were used like cattle to clear minefields, and even use up the ammunition of the enemies they were facing before he would even commit his world eaters. Angron was a horror, and he did not lead his legion so much as inflict himself upon them. He even had copies of his butcher's nails implanted in his Astartes, so they could share in his misery, so they could become mindless killing machines also. Smaller copies of his terrible affliction, smaller copies of his greater bestial nature. Gone were the warhounds. Gone was a warrior fraternity that fought for honor and humanity. He drenched them in blood and removed all of their hard-won worth. He destroyed them, and many of them, even just subconsciously, hated him for it. The Night Haunter, Conrad Kurz and his Night Lords. Another true misfortunate, Kurz was cursed with visions of his own death, but also with his early years, for he landed on Nostromo, a terrible place where there was no civilization as we would define it. Each and every person there was dog eat dog and did unspeakable things to each other. In this world, the young Primarch grew, always alone, none to give him succor or love, none to show him that gentleness and kindness even existed, for he looked at the darkest side of the human heart and thought it was all that existed. He waged a one-man war against crime, using terror and slaughter, and he came to rule this world. There was no more crime or cruelty, but only because he snuffed out anybody who did this. So there was no true regret or redemption in his subject population, only compliance with a dark and terrible god. And of course, this continued. For Conrad's Night Lords were drawn from the worst criminals and horrors that the world wished to simply get rid of, and Conrad hated his own legion due to it. He could see nothing but the reflection of evil he had witnessed in his formative years. Poor Conrad had a poet's heart, you see, so he knew that what he witnessed was in no small part his own fault, and he watched the other legions, the chosen sons of the Emperor, filled with honor, light, and passion to protect, to better humanity, and he despised the wretched state of his own legion, yet knew that much of it was by his own design. He hated them openly, and they hated him back. Conrad even ended his days at the hand of an assassin he knew was coming, in a place he knew it would occur due to his foresight, and he let it happen. He hated his legion so much that he would not even live to lead them. Now that is a very definition of hate. Perturabo, the Lord of Iron. The Iron Warriors were a good legion, loyal, brave, patient, and stoic. The mirror of the Imperial Fists, most surmise. They longed for their Primarch, as they believed he would champion them and raise them up, as most legions had been by their lost lords being reunited with them. Yet Perturabo was also dealt a very strange hand, not only in arriving on Olympia, a world where every single person was a tragedy of ill intent and capricious users, where few had worth and near all interactions were based on gaining something from everyone and anyone a person met. A land of politics and ultimately base treachery. Alas, this was not all, for Perturabo was strangely cursed with knowledge, knowing things as he saw them, not having the joy of discovery, but also he was always aware of the Eye of Terror, and it made him bitter and twisted. When he met his legion, he overlooked the records of their performance, and then decimated them. Not for failure or rebellion or some other transgression, but because he thought they could have done better. Let that sink in. And he rejected any form of camaraderie, treated his men like automata that did his bidding, no more. He used them like pebbles, shekels to be spent for victory. He had a vast tactical and strategic acumen, even more than most of his brother Primarchs. He could have made his legion into a beacon of accomplishment and light. He chose to be expedient and used his men instead. He rejected his honor guard, replacing them with robots, as he sneered so badly at them. He executed his officers for any failure whatsoever, and despite their motto, despite never complaining, as they were iron within, they did not love him. They hated him, as they should. Now these are known, of course, but what of others? Fulgrim the Palatine Phoenix, the Primarch of Perfection. Well, after his fall to chaos, even before that, he permitted his warriors to be used for his ego. He endorsed that arch-horror Fabius Bile to use them in experiments, also they could be enhanced to be more effective, but only so they could indeed add to his greater glory. He used them up on a whim and gave them to perform acts that damned their souls utterly and completely. Of all the changes from loyalist to traitor, the curse of chaos took most from the Emperor's children. It destroyed them. And Fulgrim was complicit in it all. Even when he was not actually in charge, as his body was possessed by a demon. Still, his soul was held in a painting and learned of the evils done in his name. But when freed, the being who once epitomized the spirit of the Emperor's crusade so much that his legion alone were permitted to wear the Emperor's symbol, the Aquila, had become so callous that he defeated the demon by being a darker soul. And Fulgrim never cared one whit for his men, not when he was a demon, certainly not before, and certainly not after. The instant his hand reached for the lair blade, it was over. But recall the tale from the beginning of this video, and you will know. Fulgrim was always broken, and the sad thing was, he had the very best of origins. He was a beacon of light on his home world, so many said. His fall was the furthest, and his depths the lowest in the end. What about the one who supposedly did nothing wrong? Magnus the Red. The Primarch who saved his legion from the flesh change. Because he cheated. He made pacts and ignored facts that were inconvenient to him. He made a pact with the devil way before even Lorgar. And when the Space Wolves, the Custodes, Oblivion Knights of the Sisters of Silence, and the very Ordo Sinister were sent to exterminate his sons, he let it happen. So deep in his self-loathing, he did not warn his legion of the imminent attack. He did not rouse himself from his chambers to confront the Wolf King until it was far too late, and his sons paid the price. So few left alive, then to be betrayed again. For Magnus did not help them when they turned. He did not even bother to make new pacts with his master Zinch. He left them to their battles and their plights, and ignored them so much that it was Arzek Ahriman who was forced to try to save them, which of course destroyed them more effectively than even the Space Wolves. Some will say that he chose damnation over leaving his sons behind and having a new legion gifted to him, that his loyalty to his sons made him fall in the end. But let us be honest. He could not even be bothered to save them. If Sand could hate, then Magnus would be one of the most despised Primarchs of all. The list goes on and on. The traitor Primarchs did not prevent their sons being smashed and chased into the Eye of Terror. They did not involve themselves in the slave or legion wars that saw most of them shattered even further, because they were now demon Primarchs, and were waging a far more important war, the Great Game. They outgrew or simply ignored their legions, their sons, as Lorgar has for 10,000 years, while navel-gazing and being deeply impressed with himself, of course. So yes, many of the Primarchs were and are deeply hated, especially by their own sons. And one can say, but that was then. What of now? The demon Primarchs are, surprisingly enough, no better at all. Magnus culled the leadership of the Mysteries on his world of the Sorcerers to regain control, it is said. But in any case, of the pitifully few remaining 1,000 sons, he took out their leading lights, just so he could stamp his mark of authority again. The greatest wizard in reality, bar perhaps the Emperor, and this was the only way he could bend the 1,000 sons back to his will? Poppycock. He chose slaughter over subtlety, yet again. The Primarchs are the greatest enemies of their children, for evil can only consume. It can never truly create, and that is why they will, inevitably, lose. For evil, no matter how overwhelming, how entrenched in its power, can only prevail for a time. The human soul rises up. We do not suffer tyranny for long. Never forget, the Council of Terror was meant to rule humanity in the end, not the Primarch generals of the Legion expeditionary crusade fleets. One of the many stones that contributed to the avalanche that was the Horus heresy. But it was always meant to be humans to rule over humanity. And perhaps, just perhaps, one day, instead of ruling, they might just govern. And there is a substantial difference. The story will continue in just one moment. Just permit me to say thank you for your precious time. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo. We sat together, we three, the ones who would be named the Triumvirate, Ullik, Tarax, and I. None of us would have believed it if we had been told beforehand, but it was simply right. We bonded as I had never bonded before, and Ullik went first. He told us his deepest, darkest goal. Then Tarax stated his, and I felt that both were worthy, both were powerful, but neither goal or person would get in the way of my own. Ullik always led, even us, for he was the only man I had now met who was worthy of me following. And he said it. So, what is that which makes the Oathkeeper strive? What is your heart's desire, brother? I want my name back, which means I need to kill Fulgrim. They both beam at me. Ullik nodded. Tarax whistled and then said, "Ooh, now that will take some doing. You aim high." "Yes, I do. I will slaughter, steal, and sin my way across the galaxy until I have enough power to perform the deed myself. To slay a god, that is what I want." We looked to one another. We were in accord. Ullik pipes up and puts it into the universe. "Then we do this together. All three of our goals, we achieve them together." And we all nodded. Tarax looked to me and said, "So, revenge for your brother, eh?" I smile and state, "Oh no, for me alone. Hexamon? He was always a bastard. And I hated him. The feeling was mutual. It's why I instantly knew he agreed to kill me. Because he knew I would have said yes to even Fulgrim, and with glee. But the Primarch chose the wrong twin, so that is why I want him dead." Ullik leered at me and spat. "Then why did you always fight together so closely?" And I told him the truth that I had never said to anyone. "It's simple, Ullik. Neither of us could bear missing it. We wanted to be there when it happened, to watch the other die." Tarax and Ullik are stunned for a mere second, then both grin back at me. They knew I meant it, and we all laughed.